Well, we have spoke about a lot of things, haven't we, Donna?
Yes, we have.
Okay, so we haven't solved all the world's problems, but we've made a little dent. We're working our way forward, okay? So, as you know, I'm running for sheriff here in Washtenaw County. And
Yes.
one of my platform issues that I speak about all the time, and I've been speaking about it for years because I saw the problem years ago and it hasn't gotten any better. It's only gotten worse. And I do blame part of that on our elected officials, because they have been given plenty of notice that we have things going on in our community. And it's up to our elected officials to work with the community, I believe, in making our community a safer place. Public awareness, things of that nature, and we're gonna talk about that. But in Washtenaw County, we touched on some of the statistics earlier. We've lost close to 700 people in the last decades to drug overdoses. The majority of them are fentanyl. And the ones that aren't fentanyl are sometimes a combination of other drugs, but for the most part, we're talking about fentanyl. We spoke about earlier about methamphetamine. I was a federal agent in the Pacific Northwest and tasked with creating strategies to combat methamphetamine, clandestine lab manufacturing. And one of the things we did was work closely with the state, and there were laws that were passed that deal, for example, that would take the ephedrine off the shelf, so people would go in and steal all the cold tablets. They'd lock them up behind the counters because those cold tablets were utilized. They have something called blister packs where you take each pill out of the blister packs, and they ultimately would have small labs. And small labs that could be made in hotel bathrooms, in the sinks or in the bathtubs, or maybe in the country, things of that nature. And labs would get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But my point is, we continued a public awareness aspect of this to educate the public as to what was going on. And community leaders and elected officials got behind that problem. You were going to say something.
Yeah, like shake and bake, where they make it in a bottle. And people have actually really shut down hospitals because if it explodes, people just, the care in that takes so much. You blow off your arm.
Yeah, well, it's not just that, but it's the hazmat aspect of it with the chemicals that are released into the atmosphere, into the environment, and in the area. They're extremely dangerous. So I, as a law enforcement leader for years and years and years, have always looked at problems and how do we tackle the problem? And I look and say what's successful and what's not successful. Well, years ago I learned the fact, and from my mentors and educators, we're not going to arrest our way out of the situation, okay? That's never gonna happen. We're not gonna arrest our way out of the situation, number one. Number two is, and this is controversial sometimes, I say we will never win the war against drugs, but we will win every battle we choose to fight. And an example of that, a very small example, but nicotine, cigarettes. They used to be considered healthy for you. You look in the 1940s, 9 out of 10 doctors prefer Camel cigarettes, or you'd see athletes. Before a big game, my voice is a little bit raspy. I have a Pall Mall, or whatever the case may be. But slowly but surely, education and awareness attack that problem. And then in the 60s, the Surgeon General has warned that smoking cigarettes can be dangerous for your health, and a few years later, that it can impact pregnancies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are ways that baby steps all along the way. We won that battle, but there's other drugs and there's other problems out there that impact community in a very negative way. So I say we may not win the war against drugs, but we'll win every battle we choose to fight. And what do I mean by that? If a specific high school is having a series of overdoses and kids have died in that high school, now we have a battle on our hands. What's going on right there in that geographical location? We need to attack the problem there. We need to fight this battle.
Right.
And that's the way we win our small battles. And we should never back down from those battles, because all those battles are all involved with this ongoing war. There's a lot of analogies that we could have, that there's always going to be battles that we have to fight through the decades and the years and centuries and things of that nature. But I prefer to stick right with the drug conversation. So what did I do? I've taken a look at all the problems that we face. Over 700 people dying in our county. how are they dying of these drug overdoses? And I have utilized my experience and my knowledge of being involved in this situation for well over 30 years and also being a family member of an individual impacted. And I created an acronym, and that acronym is called PETER. It stands for Prevention, Enforcement, Treatment, Education, and Recovery. And some people would say, what does the sheriff have to do with recovery? Well, not a lot where he can get involved so much in it, but I have ideas where he can. What can he be involved in other areas, such as treatment? Well, there are areas that we can help in treatment as law enforcement leaders. But when I look at it, the 5 different categories, PETER, prevention, enforcement, treatment, education, and recovery, no one ever comes to the plate and say, we need to sit down as a group, as a society, and bring everyone to the table. And when they do something like that, you know what they call it? They say, we're gonna have a yearly summit. And my response to that is, a yearly summit. Well, by that time, we'll have another 70, 80, 90, 100 people dead. Why are we having yearly summits instead of weekly gatherings where the heads of law enforcement and all those different agencies are talking? Because we all heard of Hurricane Katrina, right? They were getting, because opioids and fentanyl is our nation's Katrina. It's killing people at a more rapid speed than anything else. So Hurricane Katrina, they had operations at the highest levels in meetings every hour. So why can't we take our situation instead of having yearly summits and hold our leaders accountable right then and there every week, getting together and discussing what are we doing this week. So let me break this down, and I'd like your input. Prevention, enforcement, treatment, education, and recovery. And people quite frequently say, what's the difference between prevention and education? And there's a huge difference, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But prevention, obviously prevention, we think right off the bat of our children. How do we prevent our kids from becoming involved in drugs? And studies show that more than 2 after-school activities per week reduce the amount of kids entering into substance use. But otherwise, other things that we can do in prevention. Your situation happened in a doctoral situation.
Right.
In a health crisis, so to speak, painkillers from surgery. So prevention can come into account that way as well. But prevention can also be done in other forms, and that is the gathering of kids to discuss the problem. And this is different than education, but kids working with one another and working, such as in Chelsea. With their peers, such as in Chelsea, Michigan, they have a group, and some of the other areas called Seriously. And it's an acronym that deals with working with kids and helping kids understand the dangers. Do you have any input on the area of prevention?
Well, what my husband and I did, we actually marched to Purdue Pharmaceuticals with 500 other parents after Paige passed.
Okay.
And we have pretty much worked at holding them accountable. And so that they're stopping their habits and preventing things that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because the doctors that they'll need to be doing prevention everywhere in the communities and the groups, you know, but once a year to Washington doesn't work.
Well, it's interesting you talk about your march to pharma, big pharma, okay? Because in reality, that covers 3 of the components of PETER. It covers the prevention. Let me move into enforcement now. Enforcement is just what it sounds like, law enforcement. But there's a small segment over here as well, and that's enforcement of family values and peer-to-peer enforcement of holding each other in check and things of that nature. But for the most part, it's enforcement through law enforcement and holding big pharma accountable through civil sanctions and enforcement of certain laws and lawsuits and things like that. That helps tremendously. And I think it is having an impact. But it's definitely having an impact, but through that success, we are having some of the concerns that we have stated about earlier, and that is now resorting to heroin on the street or fentanyl being produced overseas. But if we continue to make sure that people aren't being addicted to the drugs that the big pharma is prescribing, then that will reduce the amount of people that we have to be concerned about and can focus on those others.
See, well, how do you feel about big pharma and them being criminals?
Well, I do believe that there are certain lawsuits and criminal cases that are transpiring at the federal level through the United States, and I agree with that.
Well, I was one of 25 who's out of 180,000 that spoke in the bankruptcy court.
I remember you had mentioned that to me, and I do believe, and that's awesome that you were one of the ones selected, and that's just an attribute to this young lady here as well.
It
And,
gave me 5 minutes. But the next morning, the New York Times, the headlines were, "We murdered my daughter."
that was your quote. Very good.
Yes, and
Very
her
powerful.
story was picked up by all kinds of broadcasting.
Once
around the
again,
world.
a tribute to Paige, a tribute to you and your husband and the rest of your family. And yes, I do believe that in areas we could hold them criminally responsible. There's a book out that a friend of mine is actually heavily involved in, that was a DEA agent that was fighting Big Pharma. And the name of the book is called American Cartel. And it talks about some of the aspects of Big Pharma. So holding Big Pharma accountable is part of law enforcement, but normally Big Pharma at the criminal level, that's on the levels of federal prosecution with the United States Attorney's Office. You were going to say something?
Yeah, because they made so much money and they're not gonna lose it. It's all insured. You know, they're not the Sackler family. No one's.
Well, I think some United States prosecutors are, and I know there's been millions of dollars returned to the community that's supposed to be used for opioid addiction. And the state of Michigan has a grant that comes in every county as well. But how effectively that's being used, are they using it with the concept that I have is called PETER, Prevention, Enforcement, Treatment, and Education and Recovery. But real quick, when it comes to, you and I are in sync on Big Pharma. There's no question about it. Hold them responsible civilly and criminally, if at all possible, to prove a criminal case. But enforcement also means creating multi-jurisdictional task forces to hold drug dealers accountable. And I want to do that. I want to have drug dealers arrested. And I want to go after them because those are the ones that are providing the drugs that are killing people like your daughter as well. So Big Pharma got your daughter into it. The drug dealers on the street are what ended your daughter's life as well. You know, the combination, they're all complicit even though they don't know one another. So I believe in creating multi-jurisdictional task forces to attack the problem, using law enforcement agencies from federal, state, and local levels, as well as prosecution from federal and state and local levels to be able to attack drug dealers. Conversely, I also believe gun violence is directly attributed to the drug violence or drug dealing on the street. Drug violence and gun violence go hand in hand with one another. And so I believe holding people accountable that are running guns illegally. Guns are utilized in more than 25% of drug deals. Guns are there. They're there to barter, they're there to protect, or they're there for revenge. And that's one of the things that's killing so many of our people as well. And that's also part of my platform, to attack gun violence, whether it be through street violence, domestic violence, accidental shootings, or suicide. I want to take you to the next area, and that is treatment. As the next sheriff, what I plan on doing is I plan on taking half the jail and revamping the jail and creating a treatment facility in the jail.
That's awesome.
And the way I will do that is I will get rid of some high-level positions that are politically appointees and utilize that money to hire substance use disorders to work within the jails. And how do I want to do that? And that is, I don't want to hold people responsible to the area of confining them in incarceration for having a drug problem. I want to get them treatment. okay? What am I saying there? If my officers find somebody on the street with a gram of heroin, I don't want them charged with a felony. I want them to get treatment. That's how I want to handle it. However, there are other people that commit crimes while high on drugs, whether it be breaking and entering, whether it be stealing checks, whether it be retail fraud, things of that nature, that are going to be held accountable anyway. So they're doing, say, 90 days in jail, or 180 days, whatever the judge sentenced to them. If I have a recovery unit within the jail, I can get these people immediately involved in treatment. Now, some people say, well, we already have counselors and substance use disorder people come into the jail. They meet with them twice a week or whatever. That's not treatment. That's like saying, that's like somebody saying, I want to lose a whole bunch of weight, and they say, well, I walk every day for 5 minutes. Well, you're going to also have to do other things. You're going to have to watch what you eat. You're going to have to exercise a little bit more. You're going to have to do this, do that. My point is.
And they need to learn life skills all over again.
And that is what happens in that unit with the substance use treatment disorder counselors. And that's the way I look at things. For example, they have TVs in the jail. On those TVs, we can have classes as well, 24/7. Whether it be yoga therapy, whether it be fitness therapy, whether it be mental therapy, whether it be coping skills, whether it be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, a whole bunch of things. But if we had them, for lack of a better term, it's a captive audience. They're going to be there for 90 days or whatever. I want to have a treatment facility within the jail. That's how I believe the sheriff can help in the treatment area.
Yeah, I had that idea because Baldwin has a huge jail, and it's empty. It's been sitting empty for years.
It's a building.
It's huge. It has got, like the pods where they don't have to be locked up.
Exactly.
There's TVs. It holds like 1,800 people.
There are people turning old jails into restaurants. Why can't we turn around and turn them into treatment and rehabilitation facilities?
I mean, it's brand new, but it's owned by a company in Florida. But it's been closed for 2 years. But that was my idea too.
Okay.
Well,
we're in sync. We're in sync.
Treatment centers like that.
So then we get into the next part, and that's education. And education has got a fascinating component to it, and that is, we talked about prevention earlier. Education deals with educating our elected officials, educating our school officials, educating our parents. And education is huge, because if we educate the elected officials to know that we have all these problems in our community, A, they can help law enforcement do their job. B, they can help the treatment people do their job. And they can help the prevention people do their job. So education is somewhat different than prevention. And that's kind of where I come into things with the E, the second E. So we have prevention, enforcement, treatment, and education. And you are doing your job in education by A, marching to Big Pharma, B, testifying as one of 20 individuals, getting your statement in the New York Times. That is educating the public, in my opinion. Then we have R, and that's recovery. And how can the sheriff's office help with recovery? And that is having the treatment facility, because that's where recovery starts, number one. But it can also be when you bring all the people to the table that are involved in the prevention, enforcement, treatment, education, recovery world, letting people know that you as law enforcement officials support what they're doing, and understanding that we understand as law enforcement leaders that recovery is a lifelong process for some, and for some it's a year process, and for others it's very quick. But there's not one size fits all in recovery. We agree on that, correct?
Right.
What would you throw in there as well, if you could?
I lost my train of thought there.
Well, that's
Go
okay.
back a minute.
That's okay. Well, we're winding down here, so what I really want to stress is this, is that I can learn from you, and you can probably learn some things from me as well when it comes to this epidemic we face. But together, as long as we continue to keep it on the front burner and not hide it, take these tragedies, Paige's tragedy, and turn it into a treasure like you have been, and continue to do that. And I encourage you to continue your lifelong pursuit of doing that.
I had tried, after Paige had passed and that, to go to one of the senators, I don't know, if he was a senator, congressman.
Mhm.
And they were going to write, he was going to try and write a bill that if you overdosed, it was a mandatory 6 months recovery.
Well, that's an interesting philosophy. I'm gonna do some research on that. And
They got dropped.
it got dropped, and why it got dropped, I'm not sure. Maybe they say, well, along with that comes the expenses, and who's gonna pay for that? But it's a fascinating concept, and let's do this again sometime, okay? Can we promise one another to get together? And,
Yeah.
and whether I win this election or not, I'd love to sit down and talk to you and learn more about Paige and what Judge Judy is doing and what you're doing in your travels, and God bless you, okay? And God bless this beautiful
You
lady
too.
as well.
Yep,
Okay.
he's the one that's got me going.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.